In life, we as humans gain these things called acquired tastes. This is something you don't like that you gradually learn to like over time. This could be stuff like social interaction, alcohol, or exercise. But in life, there is a equal and opposite reaction to every action. So if there is such thing as an acquired taste, then there needs to be such thing as an acquired distaste. This could be stuff like social interaction, alcohol, or BioShock Infinite Burial at Sea episodes 1 and 2. Hello, I'm B4 Brandos, and welcome to the channel. And if you haven't watched any of my videos before, you might not know this, but I am a bit of a BioShock nerd. Keyword, a little bit, just a little bit. I like the games a little bit. As a kid, I didn't really get that much pocket money, so when I did, I would put my money into Steam and find a new game to play, and there wasn't a game series that caught my imagination like BioShock did. When I bought a new game, I was pretty much entering into a legal contract with myself to play that game until I had enough money to buy a new one. So I got very acquainted with the halls of Rapture and the buildings of Columbia and clocked in some serious hours there. However, I always loved Rapture more than Columbia. To me, Rapture felt somehow more realistic and more developed, while Columbia felt more dreamed up and slapdash to me. But the game, the story, the mechanics, they all made for a great game that I still loved, and I consider BioShock Infinite to be a modern day classic. So I was ecstatic when I heard a kind of sequel DLC was coming up for BioShock Infinite that would once again fill the Rapture-shaped hole in my heart. And that DLC was BioShock Burial at Sea episodes 1 and 2. I played it, loved it, played it again, loved it again, played it again, you get the idea. All this DLC served to do for me was suck me further into the BioShock lore, and I was obsessed. I read the tie-in book, I would read the BioShock wiki on my off time at work, and this is where my problems with the DLC started. As I dove further into the lore, I began to notice some inconsistencies between all the games. Inconsistencies that would be more considered massive plot holes if not completely game universe destroying oversights. And although some of these plot holes came from the book and related to the game, or BioShock 2 undid something BioShock 1 did, the real egregious stuff came from Burial at Sea and its episodes. But to help you understand why, I need to give you a quick recap of BioShock Infinite. So BioShock Infinite starts with a quote that I'm talking about for no reason, because it won't be relevant later. We play as a private investigator named Booker DeWitt, who's been sent here to find a girl named Elizabeth. But where is here? Well, it's the secretive city of Columbia, a religious nexus point of hating the United States and hating anyone that's from any other country in the world.
Are you gonna throw it? Or are you taking your coffee black these days?
I'm feeling a little irked, or at least like irked adjacent, and then these guys bring in their bad vibes? Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
And all this madness comes from one man named Zachary Hale, Comstock, a war veteran turned prophet who's been predicting that a man, the false shepherd, will come to Columbia and lead the lamb astray. Turns out the false shepherd is Booker, and Elizabeth also turns out to be this lamb. From this point, Booker has to fight his way to a giant prison tower thingy on Monument Island.
Shepherds come to lead our lamb astray! Come on now!
Hello. After grabbing her, some hijinks ensue, and by hijinks, I mean... And Elizabeth reveals that she has the power to tear open holes in time and space, an ability that may or may not be related to her missing pinky finger. A little bit later, we enter the Hall of Heroes, where a man Booker knows as Cornelius Slate is having a standoff with Comstock's forces. Slate isn't happy that the Hall of Heroes discounts his history, with Comstock inserting himself into every conflict front and center, conflicts that Slate and Booker actually fought in together. Continuing onwards, some universe-hopping hijinks happen, Booker gets a couple hundred nosebleeds, and we eventually catch up to Comstock, who we drown. At this point, Elizabeth and Booker realize that the tower she was kept in was actually siphoning her power in order to keep her under control, and we destroy it, turning Elizabeth into pretty much a demigod. With her powers fully unlocked, Elizabeth transports us to Rapture to save us from Songbird, her giant protector bird thingy. Leaving Rapture, we enter Expositionville, and the reveals start coming hot and heavy. See, up to this point, we didn't know a whole lot about Booker. We knew he was a soldier, then a Pinkerton, we knew he wasn't proud of the things he's done, but the thing that set Booker on the path to coming to Columbia wasn't really explained, but here we get an explanation. Pretty much after a pretty bad military battle, Booker was looking for redemption and went to get baptized. In one universe, Booker decides not to go through with it and continues on as the Booker we see in the game, while in another universe, Booker takes the baptism and changes his name to Zachary Hale Comstock. Back in the Booker universe, he ends up having a child who he names Anna. However, everything isn't perfect and Booker is an avid gambler, something I'll get back to in a second. Back in the Comstock universe, Comstock meets a woman named Rosalind Lutece, who's a scientist,
A physicist.
who has discovered the ability to travel to alternate universes using a machine. Employing the use of this machine, Comstock is able to see into the future and becomes the prophet that he is in the game. What Comstock doesn't know, however, is that this machine causes cancer, rapid aging, and infertility, with the last thing being something he could not stomach, since a big part of his prophecy was that his child would be the one to bring God's judgment back onto the world below.
The Archangel tells me that Columbia will only survive so long as my line sits the throne. Yet Lady Comstock produces no child. I have done what a man can do, yet there is no child.
So devising a plan, Comstock had Lutece find a universe where another version of himself would be willing to give away his child. A man like our main timeline Booker, who had racked up some really bad gambling debts. With the Luteces offering to wipe his debts away if he gave them Anna, main timeline Booker did so, believing it may give Anna a better life than he could provide.
What of my debts?
Bring us the girl and wipe away the debt. The debt's paid. Mr. Comstock washes you of all your sins.
Booker immediately regretted this, however, and chased the Luteces, with a struggle occurring between Comstock and Booker over Anna. But Booker lost the struggle and Comstock pulled Anna through the rift just before it closed, with Anna only losing her pinky. Oh, and if you haven't figured it out yet, yes, Elizabeth is Anna, just all grown up. Racked with guilt, Booker branded Anna's initials on his hand, Anna DeWitt, and pretty much existed in a limbo of guilt for years. But Booker wasn't the only one racked with guilt. Lutece and her alternate self weren't happy that they helped with the kidnapping of a child, and offered Booker the chance to rescue his daughter. But the thing about jumping universes in the world of Bioshock is that the brain has a very hard time justifying the sudden change, and induces a form of amnesia on itself while coming up with a logical reason for its new environment. This is called the Lutece effect, and was explained in that totally not relevant quote at the start of the game. Booker's self-invented reason was that this was obviously just another job he was doing for some people he was in debt to, and here we are. So the whole thing turns out to be a big loop. Comstock always interferes with Booker's life, and there's always an Anna DeWitt that ends up getting hurt. So to stop Comstock from ever existing, Booker and Elizabeth travel back to Booker's baptism and straight up drown Booker before he can become religious Booker or gambling Booker. How many times did I just say Booker? The game ends with the alternate Elizabeths disappearing now that their universe has become impossible, since all the alternate universe Elizabeths that are there are ones that were affected by Comstock in some way. After this, the credits roll, and if you are one of those people who respects the developers and loves to see every single name that worked on a game, and you sat through the whole credits sequence, then you get a special post-credit scene. In the post-credit scene, Booker wakes up in his office in 1893 and enters the room he kept Anna in, with the game ending before we even see if she's there.
Anna?
Is that you?
My theory is, yes, she is there, and here's why. Think of a timeline, but not in a traditional sense. Think of a timeline that is a timeline of timelines. Pre-infinite is something that always happens. Booker fights in a battle that leaves him emotionally scarred, and he goes to get baptized. At this point, the timeline splits between Booker becoming a gambling deadbeat father or becoming a racist prophet. Dudes in the early 1900s were really strapped for options. After this point, no matter what variations happen, Comstock will always go and try and kidnap Anna from his non-profit counterpart. It's then that the Lutesses try to put a stop to this by giving Booker the chance to go get his daughter, and it's our Booker that eventually succeeds. However, when Elizabeth gets powered up, she realizes that this is a vicious cycle that all stems from one event, the baptism of Booker. So killing Booker at the baptism erases Comstock and Gambler Booker from ever existing, but by extension, it also means that Comstock would never go and kidnap Anna, which means that Booker would never go to Columbia and play BioShock Infinite, which means he would never be killed at his baptism. But wouldn't that mean that Comstock still exists if the events of the game technically didn't happen?
I don't want to talk about time travel shit. Because if we start talking about it, then we're going to be here all day talking about it, making diagrams with straws. It doesn't matter.
Honestly, if I was a living embodiment of all time and space in the BioShock Infinite universe, and I saw how intermingled this entire time loop was, I think I'd just go ahead and give Elizabeth what she wanted to gain from drowning her own father, because this is just too complicated, man. Now, why did I tell you all this? This is a Burial at Sea video, not a BioShock Infinite video, right? Yeah, correct, but I wanted you to have some idea of what I'm basing my critiques off of. BioShock Infinite is a pretty great, semi-comprehensible time travel story. Burial at Sea is a pretty bad, very comprehensible but very poorly written time travel story. It takes place in Rapture on New Year's Eve 1958, the exact night that the Civil War kicks off in Rapture. In episode 1, we take control of this universe's Booker DeWitt, as he's hired by a mysterious woman, it's Elizabeth, to find a missing little sister, and a lot of it is very much a reskinned BioShock Infinite, sometimes to a very, very lazy degree, but we'll get back to that in time. But before we get into these DLCs, I just want to clearly state where I stand on the canonicity of Burial at Sea, because a big mistake I made with the System Shock video was that I did not clearly state what I thought was actually in the same universe as System Shock and what I thought were just cute little references. So behold the B4 Brandos personal opinion on how canon should work. So to clear the air on where I stand on Burial at Sea, it's not canon to the main timeline. I don't care what Ken Levine says, it just cannot work. But here's my reasoning for thinking this way. Burial at Sea cancels out the BioShock novel and partially ignores BioShock 2. Now this would be fine if the alternative pre-Civil War story Burial at Sea told was superior to the one BioShock Rapture did, but it's not. It's jarring, one note, and nowhere near as well flowing as the novel. And that's one of the reasons why I don't consider Burial at Sea canon to the main timeline. If you have to bend over backwards to make something connect to something else, all the while there's something else that does that exactly what you're trying to do in a way that connects to even more stuff than you, then it's not hard to see why it should be canon, in my opinion. Also, a prequel has a few jobs. Be a good prequel story and work well with what came before in the series. If you cannot fit your story into the pre-existing story, then there's just no room for you. The story you want to tell is too big, and if you go ahead with it, you risk ruining the continuity or devaluing your DLC. So yeah, personal opinion, Burial at Sea not canon. But what is canon? Well, that would be the BioShock novel, BioShock 1, 2, and its DLCs. And yes, I will be referencing the novel like it is gospel to the BioShock universe, because like I said, in my opinion, it works so much better than anything Burial at Sea does. Okay, I have stated that this is my personal opinion 5 times now, so you legally cannot get mad at me in the comment. So the way we're going to be running this video is by assuming that this is canon, and this wants to be canon, and we are going to be looking at why this does not fit anywhere in this. Cool? Alright, let's go.
Why isn't it possible? It's just not. Why not, you stupid bastard?
The DLC starts with the echoes of the scene from BioShock Infinite where Booker loses Anna to Comstock, and he wakes up as a woman enters his office. The woman introduces herself as Elizabeth and asks Booker to find a missing girl named Sally. Booker seems to know the kid and is suspicious, but agrees, taking on the job and heading outside his office. And wow, this is by far the most put together we have ever seen Rapture in any of the BioShock games. The buildings are glowing and seem to stretch on forever. There's not a single leak in sight. And yes, I know this is meant to be a video where I'm judging Burial at Sea, but episode 1 isn't really all that bad. It's just the setup for the really bad stuff. Anyway, in the episode, the biggest offender of continuity is the pneumolines, the air grabber, and the plasmid. So to start with the pneumoline and air grabber,
Could be handy.
A skyhook.
Skyhook? You mean the air grabber? Kids use them to ride around up on the pneumo lines.
Air grabber. Huh. constants and variables.
Constants and what?
No, Ken Levine, you cannot shove your constants and variables bullshit into this space. It does not fit. If any of you don't know who Ken Levine is, Ken Levine wrote System Shock 2, he directed Bioshock 1, he passed up Bioshock 2, and then he came back for Bioshock Infinite and these episodes. So consider Ken Levine the big daddy of the Bioshock games, with the only difference between him and a real big daddy being that Ken doesn't really remember anything about his little sister and doesn't even know why he's doing anything for her anymore.
Are we gonna be together again, Daddy?
We really can't play that card again.
Daddy!
A lot of people would come to me and say, Ken, what's Bioshock 1? Tell me the whole story. And I'd say, okay, well, Elizabeth, Bioshock 1 doesn't exist without Elizabeth.
Anyway, back to the air grabbers. Apparently these are used by kids for fun and they're just a toy, but like every splicer in the department store has one, and why the hell is Booker so ready to trust in its capability? I get in Bioshock Infinite, the skyhook was an actual manufactured tool, and so Booker jumping from skyline to skyline was like, yeah, okay, that's fair. But this is a toy. It's a toy. And then there's the pneumo lines that you ride around on. They don't make any sense. You know what pneumo stands for? Relating to the presence of air and gas. It makes sense with the pneumo tubes because that system uses compressed air to shoot items of mail through those tubes. Tubes that you can even see here. What's the deal with pneumo lines though? It looks to me like Ken Levine just went and said, we should do some of that skyhook business in Rapture and just say it's constants and variables, even though the pneumo lines never show up anywhere else, but the pneumo tubes show up everywhere in every single game. And look, this isn't too big a deal, especially not as big a deal as the plasmids in this game.
Those are Vigors!
One of the first things you will notice that's out of place in Rapture is the presence of Vigors. And they're not even Rapture themed Vigors, they are literally the same Vigors from Columbia, despite Booker using Devil's Kiss in the opening, exactly like how you would use Incinerate. And there is a lore reason for this, don't worry guys, it's just not a very good one. In the first episode, you can find audio tapes recorded by Dr. Yi Suchong, who was responsible for many of the well-known plasmids in Rapture. And you can discover through listening to these that Suchong began observing tears around Rapture and discovered that Jeremiah Fink had been copying Suchong's research and created Vigors. So in return, Suchong copied Fink's Vigors, learning how to make plasmids drinkable in the process, and began selling those. And here's the big question. If bottled plasmids were so big, then why weren't they anywhere in any of the other games? Well, that is a question I'll answer a little later when I talk about all these stupid retcons in these DLCs. Episode 1 is actually pretty alright, because you're not really told anything, nothing's really explained to you, you're just doing Rapture type stuff like going to abandoned places that have lots of leaks in them and killing junkies and stuff like that. And it doesn't get bad until things actually start getting explained to you in the last 10 minutes. Also, I know it sounds like I probably just skipped a bunch of the DLC, but there's not really that much to tell. Nothing is explained to you during the actual DLC and the actual gameplay. Pretty much it goes like Elizabeth and Booker come across an obstacle.
Masks of invitation went to artists and craftsmen alone.
Well, there's the tram.
Elizabeth and Booker embark on the journey to go solve that obstacle because they usually need an item to get past it. Along the way, Booker asks a question and then Elizabeth says something like, "That's for me to know and you to find out."
So, what kind of field you in?
Field?
Yeah, you know, occupation. Can't imagine what kind of employment would lead you to tag along on a job like this.
I suppose you could say I work in debt collection.
All right. I know you're the client and all, but I've gone about far enough without a few answers.
My purpose here is none of your concern. Consider me a means to an end.
Then we get the thing, and then we go to the next place, and then there's another obstacle.
Really? Yep. Because obviously this dynamic could go on indefinitely. I mean, will that really be it?
Definitely. Alright, cheers. Oh, listen, one more thing.
There you go, that's the full DLC except for these last 10 minutes we're going to talk about. So, reaching the end of the DLC, we've tracked down Sally, and she's hiding in the little sister vents, which gives Elizabeth the great idea to turn the vent heating up all the way to flush her out. Also, we decide to close all the vents but one so that we can force the 8-year-old girl to possibly try 5 different locked exits while crawling through steaming hot pipes. Even battle-hardened Pinkerton thug, alcoholic, gambler, and all-round piece of crap Booker DeWitt thinks that this is a horrible thing to do to someone, but Elizabeth doesn't care and does it anyway. But the plan works, and we eventually catch up to Sally with this cutscene playing.
Sally, it's Booker. It's me. Sally, come on. I'm gonna get you out of here. Sally! Come out here right now! Sally. No.
I am truly glad that some of you got to experience how awesome that cutscene is for the first time without knowing what I know, because I'm going to ruin that later. Oh yeah, this Big Daddy has a projectile launchable drill, by the way, which he can use like a grapple hook, which is pretty cool until you try to run away from him.
You don't look so good.
Stop it! Will you stop it?
It's really weird that the only reason the Big Daddy has the launchable drill is so that he can pull Booker DeWitt off the pneumo lines if the player is camping on them. But in that case, why even put the air grabber in? Projectile launchable drill breaks a bit of continuity just like the air grabber, and it's annoying. I can say on good authority that fighting a Big Daddy is way scarier when you can't just fly away, and it is way less annoying when the Big Daddy can't grab you from halfway across Rapture. This Big Daddy also has an ability from Bioshock 1 that stuns you, slowing you down, except in this one the sprinting animation still plays at full speed, so it feels less like you've been stunned and more like someone just coated the floor in oil. Anyway, we kill the Big Daddy, and I want to put emphasis on kill. He's dead. He's not moving. I shot him till he died. He's just lying there. He's dead. We return to the vent to help Sally, and the veil on what's really going on is lifted to reveal maybe the worst twist in the entire series.
I'm here. I just want to take you home. I just want to kill us off. Give her back. Give her back.
You're hurting her.
She's got to come with me.
She's not your child.
She is mine.
Let her go. Let her go.
She's mine. It's closing. Shut it down. Shut down the machine.
You've got to pull her through.
Shut down the machine. No, she's not through. Shut it down.
No, look,
Child, I am so sorry.
No, you're not. But you're about to be.
So it turns out this Booker is actually a guilt-ridden Comstock who accidentally killed Anna in his universe. While Elizabeth just lost a pinky in the Bioshock Infinite main universe, this other Elizabeth just straight up died. So Comstock came to Rapture to start anew. Now in Burial at Sea episode 2, Elizabeth describes this Comstock as the last one. But the question is, how? Well everyone, put on your thought registering caps but not your thinking caps, because if you think about this one a little too hard, your brain is going to catch fire. So in the Bioshock universe, there are alternate realities within alternate realities. In the Columbia universe, the main game Booker lived in a world where Columbia never existed because he never became Prophet. While in Comstock's world, there is a Columbia. While in Columbia, there is a world where everything is relatively peaceful in 1912. And then there is another world where a revolution is in full swing in 1912. But let's zoom out. All of these alternate worlds are contained within a single alternate world, and these other alternate worlds are not affected by each other because they are so disconnected from each other. The Lutece twins describe it like two sides of a coin. On one side of the coin you have the world of Booker DeWitt, Columbia, and Vigors, and on the other side of the coin you have the world of Jack, Rapture, and Plasmids. These two worlds are so separate from each other and came about in such different ways that no amount of alternate realities in Columbia's world would ever affect Rapture or its alternate realities. Like at the end of Bioshock Infinite in the Sea of Dawn, because when we're looking around the Columbia universe, there are only Columbia lighthouses. Each lighthouse represents an alternate reality, just like how there are only Rapture lighthouses on the Rapture side. Anyway, how does this affect our Comstock in Burial at Sea Episode 1? Well, at the end of Bioshock, we erase Comstock from the timeline, meaning he could never exist. However, the action that made it so he could never exist still had to happen while he existed. This was the events of Bioshock Infinite. So if in some weird way the events of Bioshock Infinite caused itself to never happen, then it had to have happened, which means that anything that happened while that timeline was around still happened, like a guilt-ridden Comstock coming to Rapture. And after he came to Rapture, he officially joined the other side of the coin, which means that the ending of Bioshock Infinite would not affect Burial at Sea's Comstock because he is now a part of the Rapture reality and its alternate realities, something that the other side of the coin, Columbia, could not affect. Now, as for him being the last Comstock, he's not, because it's Bioshock Infinite. If one Comstock escaped to Rapture, then an infinite amount of Comstocks escaped to Rapture. Comstock escapes, but he has a lighter in his pocket. Comstock escapes to Rapture, but he shaved before he got there. That kind of thing. But also, once in Rapture, every choice Comstock would make would create a new branch timeline. Like one day, if Comstock goes to open his door and he realizes he forgot his wallet, an alternate reality would form where Comstock did not remember that he forgot his wallet and just walked out the door. So yeah, Elizabeth is here to kill this guy because he's the last one left, but he's not. Comstock has been in Rapture for nearly a decade, and since then he has created an infinite amount of branched Comstock Rapture timelines, and the only way you could actually purge him is if you killed him the absolute millisecond he stepped through that tear into Rapture for the first time. And even then, it probably wouldn't work, because if you killed him before he could do anything, then there would obviously be a universe where you didn't end up killing him. But let's just think for a second here. Does Comstock really deserve to die anyway? He gave up all the power he had as a prophet in Columbia, branded himself like Booker did when he lost Anna, and even started caring for Sally as a sort of atonement, whether he knew it or not. Sure, this guy is the bad guy. He tried to kidnap his own daughter from an alternate version of himself. But when his mission led to his alternate daughter dying, he gave up his entire life's work, his faith, and then he came down to Rapture and became gambler, drunk Booker again, when he could have just as easily gone to the next alternate universe and gotten a different Anna completely. Come on, cut him a break. This guy is trying to atone in some little way, and Elizabeth comes in here like,
you want forgiveness? Get religion.
What could he have done in his universe anyway? Gone to the police? Yeah, I accidentally killed a kid while trying to kidnap her from an alternate version of myself. Well, no, there's no body. That's in the other universe now. Oh, and one more thing, that version of Anna technically doesn't exist anymore, because after the ending of Bioshock Infinite, Comstock does not exist and never did. But whatever, Elizabeth, go get your vengeance for a version of yourself that doesn't exist anymore. This isn't even the bad stuff, by the way. This is just awkward, lazy, nonchalant, uncaring setup for episode 2. In retrospect, it's kind of funny that I used to adore Burial at Sea episode 2 far more than episode 1, while now I enjoy episode 1 for what it can be, because without all the weird, unfitting stuff in this first episode, it's just a nice little adventure in Rapture, and in terms of continuity, the toes it steps on aren't too important. If there was no air grabber, no pneumo lines, no grapple hook daddy, and no drinkable plasmids—
in short, what makes you, you.
This DLC episode would fit almost comfortably in the same universe as the other game, just because the story this DLC tells stays pretty much the same without all of these problem elements. But then comes episode 2, which does the complete opposite and goes after the biggest fish in Rapture's lore that it can. It kind of holds the lore hostage because it says this event happened the way I tell it and it can't be any other way, otherwise I'm not canon, and then what's the point of me existing? Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling about how bad episode 2 is without you actually knowing why, and we're just going to get into it. So, if we really have to do it, let's take a look at Burial at Sea episode 2.
Holy shit, this is my garbage.
Step back and sing it for a father!
So the DLC starts in Paris, and it really seems like Elizabeth's dream come true, which it might just be, because all this weird stuff starts happening. We see a girl that looks a lot like Sally who runs off, and now everyone has vanished. We can see some heavy and not so heavy foreshadowing before we come face to face with Sally in her little sister form, and we realize that we really aren't in Paris. Elizabeth wakes up next to Booker stock, and it looks like we're about to be executed when we are rescued by a familiar face.
What's the holdup?
Just having a bit of a laugh, Atlas.
This ain't a sporting event. Put a bullet in her. No need to torture the poor girl. We're not animals, you know.
A hallucination of Booker shows up and tells Elizabeth to tell Atlas that she can get him back to Rapture, and he believes her, with the objective of the DLC being set up to be Elizabeth bringing the Fontaine department store back to Rapture's depth. Look, it is great to see Atlas, but he is definitely going on the list of continuity errors for this episode because
you're not supposed to be here.
Now we get up and begin the actual gameplay, and we get to listen to the start of the endless flow of cope and blame dodging that Elizabeth will be spewing through this DLC.
What have I gotten myself into? I didn't orphan that girl. I didn't kidnap her.
But she made for some exceptional bait, didn't she?
Had to be done.
Did it?
I felt everything that every version of me felt. All of that knowledge. I lost a pinky, but that version of me, she lost everything. And Comstock, that final Comstock, he thought he could avoid his guilt by coming here.
Was he trying to avoid his guilt by coming to Rapture? Maybe, but he seemed pretty damn sorry, and also, he did come down to this department store to help a girl he's been caring for. Like, he's being selfless and going out of his way to do something for someone for free. That goes against the entire philosophy that Rapture is built on. Plus, does it even matter if Comstock was the bad guy anymore? Because guess what Elizabeth did after she got supreme justice for a version of herself that didn't exist anymore? She left Rapture! Without Sally!
Why am I back here? Huh? I don't remember opening a tear to come back.
So you're telling me you were getting revenge for a girl who died? So you use a little girl who's in major trouble as bait for the guy who was trying to repent, and then after that you left after avenging the girl who died, who actually doesn't exist anymore. Yeah, so Elizabeth came to Rapture to trick a guy who had done bad stuff in the past, use someone he cared about as bait, follow him around for a few hours and help him out. Then when the person who he cares about is in reach, flip the dime on him, act like he's the bad guy for trying to rescue Sally, remind him of what he did wrong, watch him die, and then leave. Can someone remind me who the bad guy is? There is an easy justification for this that I see people use all the time, by the way. Apparently, the Burial at Sea episodes are meant to be a story arc of Elizabeth realizing that she was becoming more like Comstock than she wanted to admit. So episode 2 is all about repenting and changing and all that kind of stuff, but it just falls so flat on its face because of the stuff that we already know about Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite. It does not work. I can see the character trajectory from BioShock Infinite to episode 1. I can see her being a little more callous, but I don't think after everything she went through, she would be doing this, you know, leaving kids to die. She's smarter than this. So Elizabeth says that she can't see the alternate universes anymore and is a little confused until we find our dead body. And as it turns out, the Big Daddy from the previous DLC that killed Booker also killed Elizabeth, and now she's lost her powers. Why is that? Well, everybody, get ready for the mixing of real science and fake science, and real theoretical science and real theoretical fake science, because we are going to be talking about quantum... That was weird. My brain must have actually exploded from trying to comprehend the 3 pages about quantum superpositions that I wrote. And then someone must have gone back in time and rewritten them so that they're nice and easy to understand. I'm not dead anymore. Okay, let's do this the easy way. A quantum superposition is where something is in multiple states at once. Alive, dead, here, there. After BioShock Infinite, Elizabeth technically does not exist since she erased the timeline she came from by drowning Booker. But since the timeline was erased by Elizabeth, who was led to erasing the timeline because of stuff that happened to her in the timeline she erased, she has to exist. But now her existence has no basis, no time or place. In the eyes of the universe, Elizabeth has no origin point in any universe in any time or place. She has no current state.
I have
have no knowledge of any of this. So if Elizabeth is in the Sea of Doors and then she goes to Columbia, she is still technically in the Sea of Doors because time is not relevant to her in any capacity. Think of it like a ruler. We all live our lives on the ruler. We're always moving forward and everything behind us is in our past. Now imagine if you took away the ruler, but you still are there. Everything you've ever done is no longer on a linear path. It is all happening all at once, all the time. So if Elizabeth dies in one universe, it doesn't matter because she's still alive somewhere else. Elizabeth loses her powers here because this version of Elizabeth with the thimble has gone to a place where the same version of Elizabeth with the thimble has died. This essentially confirms a few things for the universe. Which universe Elizabeth is in, which version of Elizabeth is. Confirming that the all-knowing quantum superposition Elizabeth is dead in a certain time or place means that Elizabeth is not timeless and cannot be everywhere at once, which means that all other versions of quantum Elizabeth around the multiverse can't be doing the stuff they're doing. So all these versions collapse into one. Also, with Elizabeth losing her powers, let's just establish that she has two sets. She has omniscience and she has quantum superposition status. When Elizabeth's powers are unlocked, she gains the ability to see into all universes at once. This is her omniscience. Then when she drowns Booker at the end of BioShock Infinite, she gains her quantum VIP status. Confirming her state of existence in Burial at Sea should only take away her superposition, but it also takes away her tear powers, which creates a few new problems for us. She should have her powers since there are no Comstock Elizabeth variants running around except for her. There are multiple versions of her, but they are literally the same person in mind and body. There's no reason she would enter Rapture with another body that magically has a pinky finger again. A possible reason Elizabeth would have a pinky now is because the events that led her to losing the pinky have been erased, but Elizabeth needs her tear powers to get where she is right now, and if her body can be changed because an event was erased from reality, then Elizabeth really shouldn't exist right now, at all. And if she can't be erased because she needs to exist for BioShock Infinite to be erased, then she also needs her bloody powers to exist for BioShock Infinite to be erased. This also isn't the first time Ken has retconned Elizabeth's powers, by the way. In Burial at Sea Episode 1, when Elizabeth opens a tear to get a bottle of Old Man Winter, she actually struggles when her powers should be completely unlocked. Like in Infinite, she opens a tear to Rapture with the wave of her hand, but here she struggles opening this single tear.
What was that?
It's like Ken Levine started playing with concepts that were just too big for his story to fully grasp, so he just wrote and he wrote and he wrote until the timey-wimey stuff became too complicated, made no sense, and then he was just like, yep, no one's gonna question.
Booker DeWitt explains what on earth happened at the end of BioShock Infinite.
Nobody has a clue.
Straight up, if you are writing a reality bending story and a big thing happens to a character due to reality bending, then it doesn't need to be clearly explained, but it does need a reason that can be figured out or deciphered. This up to interpretation bullshit is just lazy. If you start writing stuff that's caused by things that make no sense in regards to the pre-established rules of the universe, then you are just making shit up and presenting it in a way that makes it sound smart. Anyway, let's get off Elizabeth being normal now and talk about how stupid she is. If she had omniscience in episode 1, then she would know that she would A, regret leaving Sally behind, B, get killed by Big Daddy, and C, come back to Rapture and lose her powers. Does Elizabeth have a death wish? Because if you look at this story through the lens of Elizabeth from episode 1, she knew everything that was going to happen. She knew she was going to die and lose her powers, and she did it anyway. She did it willingly. Let's just say I had Elizabeth's future seeing powers, right? And I wanted to buy something. If I was omniscient, and I could see a future where I bought the thing and then I got buyer's remorse, I have technically experienced getting the thing and getting buyer's remorse. So I've experienced that all before I've actually done it. So I would probably not do that. I probably wouldn't buy the thing. And for a better example, what if I was omniscient about the fact that I was going to get hit by a car later today, and I go for a walk anyway to that exact same street that I know I'm going to get hit by a car on, and I just go and get hit by a car. The only reason I would ever do that is if the future is written, if it is predetermined that I'm going to get hit by a car and there's nothing I can do about it. But we cannot apply that to the universe of BioShock Infinite because we know that time is not written in advance. We absolutely know that it can be changed, otherwise the ending of BioShock Infinite wouldn't be possible. Anyway, let's move on to the actual DLC because I want to get back to the plasmids. I think a big problem with this DLC is how it looks like Rapture, but it doesn't feel like Rapture. For example, I walked into this office and I thought, yeah, this is the Rapture vibe I got from the first 2 games. But then turning around, I saw this box of possession just sitting on the table with this official directive saying it's okay to use possession on misbehaving kids, which that's kind of messed up. And also, stop it. You can't just say Vigors were such commonplace in Rapture that they were being used in schools and yet they were never mentioned in the first couple of games. It's just not authentic. It doesn't feel like Rapture. When I think of superpowers in Rapture, I don't think of cool bottles or borderline magical powers, but instead I think of needles and weird polyps and stuff. Powers in Rapture came at the price of looking like an absolute crackhead. Tight, yeah! Oh, man. Anyway, I am going to leave that rant for the end of the video because there's a lot more to talk about with that. But continuing on, entering the main area for the game, we see that Big Daddy that killed Elizabeth is just hanging around, and he will attack us on sight because Big Daddies are famously known for attacking anyone they see. Elizabeth makes it to the Silverfin restaurant where Suchong was conducting experiments on tears, and our new goal is to get to Columbia, steal a loot test particle, that's the thing that lets buildings float in Columbia, and use it to make the Fontaine department store rise back to Rapture. But before we do that, we have to fix the machine, and after a bit of fetch questing, we managed to do it. Oh yeah, and before we go to Columbia, there are secret transmissions you can find around the open department store area that tells the story of Atlas trying to get a hold of something from Suchong called the Ace in the Hole. And by the 4th transmission, we learn that Ryan is planning to send forces down to the department store to kill everyone, and we're given a location of a secret room in the Manta Ray Lounge. Entering this room, Elizabeth discovers that Atlas is actually Frank Fontaine.
Fontaine and Atlas. Son of a bitch.
Man, this little Easter egg causes some serious problems for the story going forward, but we'll get back to that later when it becomes relevant. Because back with the tower, we enter Columbia and we grab the loot test particle, but Suchong won't let us come back until we get a sample of hair from one of Jeremiah Fink's old labs. So making our way through the labs, we get our hands on the hair sample, which happens to be Elizabeth's from when she was a girl. See, Fink was trying to get Songbird to bond with Elizabeth with no success, but eventually the two bonded when Songbird crashed into Elizabeth's tower. Elizabeth restored Songbird's oxygen flow, and that was that. The two bonded, and that's why Suchong wants a lock of Elizabeth's hair. He believes that the answer to bonding the little sisters to the Big Daddies lie in her DNA. One thing about Columbia, by the way, this tear shouldn't exist because it goes to the erased timeline, the BioShock Infinite timeline. The only reason Elizabeth is here in the first place is because she erased this timeline. It shouldn't be here. Sure, in the background of the universe, somehow these events still happen, but they don't exist anymore. They shouldn't be accessible. But anyway, I don't care. I don't care about quantum bullshit anymore. I don't want to talk about it. But upon returning to Rapture, it sounds like Ryan's security team has entered the building, and we get a face-to-face with Andrew Ryan on TV.
What they call someone who enters a man's home uninvited. A thief.
Ryan says he knows Elizabeth isn't from Rapture and offers to take her on as an employee.
Work for me or die with Atlas.
I'm not going anywhere without that girl.
If it's a little sister you want, that shouldn't stand in the way of commerce. I've got dozens of them.
I won't leave without her.
My men stand ready to take down the door.
So negotiations don't go well, and we're left getting ready for an assault. As the timer ticks down, Ryan has some more stuff to say that kinda pisses me off.
I cannot save your Sally, but I can save you.
This is not Andrew Ryan talking here. In Bioshock 1, Ryan is the enemy, so he never tries to negotiate with us. But in the book, Ryan is a very smart guy, and he's so rich because he's a good businessman. Here he's written as uncompromising, not able to negotiate past a couple of sentences. It's ridiculous. Ryan could easily have his men save Sally if he wanted, because after this assault, we can head outside and see that his guys are tearing through the splices. And when we get close to where we need to go near the end of the game, we can hear one of Ryan's guys say this.
The rest of Atlas's crew are barricaded up that elevator shaft. When the backup arrives, go in and take them out easy.
Yeah, that's right. Ryan's guys have this place locked down. Atlas's guys are like on the ropes. If Ryan was written with any actual respect to his character, he'd probably say something like, "So your Sally is with Atlas and his thugs. I think we can arrange something." Ryan's guys are about to go in there and do the thing that would get Elizabeth on his team anyway. So why doesn't he just go, "Yeah, I'll do everything I can to get your Sally back"? Ryan plays hardball, but it is smart hardball. It is completely out of character for him to pursue conflict when his two goals, killing Atlas and getting Elizabeth on his side, are right in front of him and easily achievable. And even if Ryan won't budge, why doesn't she just take the deal and say she wants to be there with Ryan's guys when they kill Atlas? Because then she'll actually have a chance to go grab Sally, and I don't think Ryan would have any objections if Elizabeth managed to save Sally and say, "Yep, I want to hold on to her." He was completely happy with giving her a completely different little sister. There'd be no reason why she couldn't just do this and he wouldn't be alright with it. Wouldn't either of these be better than just walking straight into a trap? Elizabeth says multiple times that she knows Atlas will betray her, but she goes ahead with her stupid plan anyway. Why is Elizabeth so averse to doing business with Ryan, who maybe won't stab you in the back, as opposed to Atlas, who definitely will stab you in the back? Everyone in this DLC just makes stupid decisions for the sake of connecting it to Bioshock 1. So once we get in the elevator that goes to Fontaine's office, Ryan comes back on the TV.
And who exactly are you speaking to, Miss Comstock? If I were less acquainted with the vicissitudes of genius, I suspect I would question your sanity. I know so little of you, but I imagine the more I learned, the more exceptional I would find you. You know Atlas will betray you.
And what are you? My best friend?
You're one of a kind in this world, or others.
I'm going to be completely honest. I don't even want to think about the implications of how Bioshock 1 would be different if Andrew Ryan knew about alternate universes. I don't want to think about it. This is just such a throwaway line that could change so much, and I don't want to think about it. Anyway, we make it to Fontaine's office and we activate the Lutece particle, and the game pretty much ends here because the rest of the playtime will be one big cutscene. And you know what happens when this game tries to tell a bloody story. So the department store begins to rise, and surprise, surprise, Atlas betrays us.
Did your mom ever teach you not to put your faith in strange foreign men?
In the next scene, Elizabeth wakes up back in Rapture, tied to a chair. Atlas is talking to one of his men, and he says that they've carried out an attack on the Kashmir restaurant, which in the lore was the metaphorical first bullet fired in the Rapture Civil War. I've got a lot to say about that one, but that will come later. So Elizabeth gets interrogated about the ace in the hole, since she told Atlas she was Suchong's lab assistant, and so Atlas thinks that this is his way to getting the ace in the hole back. But the interrogator ends up giving Elizabeth too much truth serum, and she's knocked out for 2 weeks. Yep, Elizabeth spends 2 weeks knocked out, tied to that chair, and I don't think the time jump would be that big if Ken Levine wasn't bending over backwards to make this DLC line up with the Bioshock timeline. But yeah, Elizabeth is awake, and for this interrogation, Atlas actually shows up and decides to torture us with a transorbital lobotomy, threatening to take away everything that made Elizabeth Elizabeth if she doesn't tell him where the ace in the hole is.
Last chance, pet. Where is the ace in the hole?
Or what? What, you'll put a hole in my head and take away my memories? You want to make me forget all this? You want to make me not care anymore? Go ahead. You'll be doing me a favor.
I'd make the same noise as that if I realized that I'd been written from a scheming mastermind to a room temperature IQ villain in this afterthought of a DLC. So with Atlas not being very happy, he threatens to do the same thing to Sally in front of Elizabeth instead, and ew, with the same needle. That's disgusting, Atlas, you've gone too far. But all this eye stabbing stuff actually gets Elizabeth to remember a bit of the infinite knowledge she had as a quantum super VIP, specifically the location of the ace in the hole. Elizabeth tells Atlas and he decides to send her to get it. And why is that?
Ryan's got every turret in the place tuned to me and me man's genetic code. We'd be torn to shreds before we got 10 feet.
Oh right, you'll be torn to shreds by the security. What security? While I was writing this script, I actually booted the game back up and looked around specifically for this security, and there pretty much is none. There is one security camera in this entire area, and you're telling me Atlas and his guys couldn't just walk in and deal with it? I mean, his dude is literally just hanging around 20 meters away from the ace in the hole. Bloody hell! Anyway, the DLC ends with Elizabeth giving Atlas the ace in the hole, and in return, Atlas gives Elizabeth a wrench to the head. However, the message is coded, so just before she dies, she tells Atlas that the ace in the hole says, "Would you kindly?"
It says, "Would you kindly?"
We've got the activation phrase. Now all we've got to do is get that genetic freak of nature on an airplane, and Rapture's ours.
Epic rap battles of his
Elizabeth!
The crowbar or something.
Begin!
Will the search...
And at this point, we just devolve all the way into fan service, and we get a quick collage saying, look at all the stuff that this DLC set up and this DLC is responsible for. And we get one final bit of knowledge from Elizabeth that says it's all good that she's gonna die, because in a universe somewhere out there, Jack decides to save all the little sisters in Bioshock 1, including Sally. Elizabeth then dies and the DLC ends, setting the stage for Bioshock 1. Look, I'm not an emotionless husk of a man. When I see this ending, I still get a little bit choked up. Elizabeth is a character that we've come to know very, very well, and the role she plays in Bioshock 1's origin is pretty cool until you think about it for more than 5 seconds. Alright, I'm going to fully rip into this thing now. Let's talk about sticking your DLC where it doesn't belong.
They're all tears, right? We'll open one up. Open one up to Paris. I want to be shut of all this.
The story of Rapture is extremely tight-knit. In Bioshock, you can piece together what happened in Rapture from listening to the audio log. Bioshock 2 adds more context still, and then Bioshock Rapture, the official prequel novel, ties those two games together in a story that both complements the first 2 games and adds to them. Burial at Sea pretty much ignores Bioshock 2 and the tie-in novel in favor of Bioshock Infinite just being the catalyst for Rapture's story. The characters from all games involved make stupid out-of-character decisions. The writing is overly self-congratulatory and self-important, and overall just doesn't work. And now I'm going to tell you exactly why. So first up, let's talk about character assassination, starting with Elizabeth. In Bioshock Infinite, Elizabeth is an innocent girl, and through the game she changes to be a little more callous. I'm sure after she drowned her own father that would only get worse, but let's just think for a second why she actually drowned her father. She was trying to undo all the pain and suffering that the alternate Elizabeths had suffered, and it succeeded. But by Burial at Sea Episode 1, she's actually creating an entire multiverse of suffering, and since she's omniscient, she would know this because she could see the future where she loses her powers and dies, but she did all this anyway. Just think about this. Elizabeth knew she was going to regret leaving Sally behind, but she went ahead and left Sally behind anyway. She then went back, lost her powers, and then directly helped start the Rapture Civil War just so that in some universes, Jack would come to Rapture and save Sally. Let me put that another way. She knew that by not saving Sally, she would come back and directly have to start a civil war where thousands of people would die just to give Sally a chance of being rescued in some universes instead of just saving her directly. But here's another thing to think about. If every choice in the Bioshock universe leads to an alternate reality branching out, then there is an infinite amount of universes where Jack rocks up to Rapture and harvests all the little sisters, including Sally. This is not a W, Elizabeth. It's not. Forget Atlas lobotomizing Elizabeth. Ken Levine lobotomized her between the main game and this DLC. Elizabeth spends the whole episode whining about how the circle of suffering never stops, then acts like it's a victory when she does fuck all to actually stop the circle of violence. And yeah, maybe she's just happy that she got a singular W in this singular universe, but for a woman who literally knew everything going into this situation, I am very surprised that she was satisfied choosing this path. If she really wanted to stop the circle of suffering in Rapture, then she would go back to when Andrew Ryan was a baby and kill him. Oh, and speaking of Andrew Ryan, what did they do to my man? By not taking a couple minutes out of his day to properly negotiate with Elizabeth, he actually helped start the Rapture Civil War, a war that would not be as large in scale or maybe even happen in the first place if Atlas and his men were dead. Oh, and while we're on the topic of Atlas, why is it possible for Elizabeth to learn Atlas's true identity as Frank Fontaine, but not use that information to her advantage? Like, if you wait to attempt the Easter egg until after you go to Columbia, you cannot do it because all the transmission papers have disappeared. So Elizabeth has to canonically learn Atlas's identity as Frank Fontaine before she talks to Andrew Ryan. And do you know how differently things would go if Ryan knew that Atlas was actually his greatest adversary under a different name? The first thing Ryan would do is he'd probably get on the public announcement system and say, "Everybody, Atlas is actually Frank Fontaine." And yeah, there were some people that loved Frank Fontaine in Rapture, but a lot of them by this point in the Rapture timeline just thought he was a criminal. So if Atlas, their great revolutionary, was exposed to actually be this businessman that faked his death, he would lose a ton of support. He'd probably even be killed by his own people. Elizabeth could even use this information to blackmail Fontaine if she wanted to, but she doesn't. She doesn't even bring it up with Atlas after she finds there's a room. And if we're going to talk about Atlas, let's talk about his personality. Atlas is meant to be the exact opposite of Frank Fontaine. In the book, not even Atlas's own men know that he's Fontaine and regard him as a noble hero type revolutionary, because that's what Fontaine designed Atlas's character to be. There's even a few audio logs in the original Bioshock to support this. Point is that Atlas is way too evil in this DLC. Like, whenever he gets angry, he breaks character and his real accent slips out.
You're a regular hero, ain't you? Can't risk ripping the only part of you that's worth a damn. Hey! What does this say?
Anyone would be able to tell that this guy is actually Fontaine. It's also implied that people know about Fontaine's secret dressing room, meaning at least one of Atlas's guys has to know that Atlas is actually Fontaine. And that whole concept fails Fontaine as a character completely. Fontaine doesn't trust anyone, and in Bioshock 1 we can find an audio diary that shows what Atlas does to followers who discover his true identity.
Never play a man for the short con when you can play him for the long one. Atlas is the longest con of all. Ryan wanted Frank Fontaine dead. I just gave him what he wanted. As Atlas, I got a new face, a clean record, and a fresh start. Now, it's time to take back Rapture.
It'll be so pleased.
Oh, Mrs. McClintock! What are you doing here? Let me just turn this off.
This scene also plays out in the book and continues on after he switches off the audio tape, and it's revealed that Diane gets stabbed to death by Fontaine. But really, this whole critique on Atlas doesn't matter because he's not meant to be here. This is a point I've been waiting to make because it has to do with the story of Burial at Sea as a whole and how it can't happen. Frank Fontaine is a con man, and he conned his way into Rapture, starting up many successful businesses as well as a smuggling ring. Andrew Ryan suspected this, but he didn't have solid evidence until 1958, which was something Fontaine wanted to happen. He wanted this to happen because his main goal was getting full control over Rapture, and this was something his businessman persona was preventing him from doing. He couldn't go on the offensive this way. So in a Ryan security raid, Fontaine was supposedly killed, when in reality this was just a body double. Frank's plan was was to fake his death, get facial surgery to change his look, then come back under the identity of Atlas and appeal to the unsatisfied working class of Rapture. The idea from that point was to start a revolution which would eventually result in him gaining control of Rapture. And it worked. After Fontaine's death, Ryan took control of his company, Fontaine Futuristics, which was something that did not sit well with the people of Rapture, since all it looked like was that Ryan had killed his competition then stolen his company. This was a move that Fontaine had planned for and used it as a point of outrage when speaking publicly as Atlas. Tensions eventually rose to the point where people were ready for war, and it all kicked off on New Year's Eve with a terrorist attack on the Kashmir restaurant. That timeline of events comes from the tie-in book BioShock Rapture, and it is heavily supported by the game, and it heavily supports the game. For instance, in BioShock 1, you can find a recording near Apollo Square from a woman named Diane McClintock, who has become very dissatisfied with Rapture and describes an event in which a woman is killed trying to jump over a fence. This scene plays out in the book and takes place in December of 1958 near Christmas. It's right after this that Diane observes Atlas giving out free food with his men before running off when the constables arrive. Now, how can Atlas be in Apollo Square in December of 1958 when he's meant to be in the sunken Fontaine department store, a department store that was sunk months earlier? Well, he can't be. I'm assuming that the implication in the department store with Atlas's medicine and food stalls is that he was operating out of there before it was sunk, but the question is, why? Fontaine's department store was a high-class place. People would go there to shop. People with money. People weren't begging in Fontaine's department store. No one lived there. It doesn't make any sense for him to be operating his charity operations out of that area, especially when it's in such close proximity to his old identity. That's why it made sense that Atlas was hanging around Apollo Square and the slums in the book, because that's where he would actually find new followers. Plus, did the writers forget that by this point in the Rapture timeline, people were being hung for smuggling and treason in Apollo Square? If Ryan really got a hold of Atlas, I imagine he would probably have him hung, not put in jail. This whole department store, in my opinion, just cheapens the conflict that took place in Rapture. In the book and the audio diaries found in the previous games, it was a slow but gradual buildup of tension before the Kashmir was bombed. And Ryan taking full control of Fontaine Futuristics was a big addition to that. But in the civilized part of Rapture in Burial at Sea Episode 1, you can hear people talking about the Fontaine situation, but none of it comes across as anything more than gossip, the news of the week. In the book, by this time in Rapture's history, splices were getting pretty common. Corpses were starting to show up all over the city. Corpses that Little Sisters and Alpha Series Big Daddies would go around harvesting Adam from. People were beginning to carry weapons around in case of a splicer attack. I know the devs wanted to show Rapture in its prime, but by New Year's Eve 1958, Rapture was nowhere near its prime. Not by a long shot. A more accurate look at 1958 Rapture would probably be the BioShock 2 intro. Subject Delta is protecting Eleanor as they harvest a dead body inside the Adonis Luxury Resort. This is a room in a high-class place in a luxury resort on the same night Burial at Sea takes place, and there's a dead body. You know, things are definitely not rosy here. It just feels like everything that happens in BioShock 1 was meant to happen because of Burial at Sea. Like the war only starts because Elizabeth helps Atlas escape. Something she has to do because Andrew Ryan is written in a dumb way, and before even that, Elizabeth is written in a dumb way too. Plus, why does Atlas need to find the ace in the hole so desperately? Why does he not know the activation phrase for his backup plan? For some context, Fontaine's whole Jack backup plan starts in 1956 when he gets wind that Andrew Ryan got Jasmine Jolene pregnant. So he gets Tenenbaum and Dr. Suchong to go pay her a ton of money in exchange for the egg, and they begin genetically engineering a sleeper agent, one that Fontaine was very, very involved in the development of, one that they sent out of Rapture before Fontaine was even killed. There is no possible way that Fontaine/Atlas did not know the activation phrase, especially since in the DLC, an audio diary we can find that was also in the original game has Suchong demonstrating the activation phrase "would you kindly" on a young Jack. And this audio diary is dated July 12th, 1956. 2 years before Suchong started working for Ryan, 2 years before Fontaine faked his death. Fontaine knows the activation phrase. There's just no possible way he doesn't, which makes this whole little side plot about me ace in the hole kind of meaningless, you know? And speaking of dumb writing, let's jump into another little problem. Plasmids, big daddies, and little sisters. So I'll just begin with plasmids. Drinkable plasmids are one of the dumbest additions made in this DLC. It creates way more problems and way more work for the writers than it would for the modelers to just rustle up some syringe models. Through the DLC, it's explained that Fink stole Adam research from Suchong, and in response, Suchong stole Fink's research on how to make plasmids drinkable. But he didn't just do that, he stole all the vigor ideas Fink came up with and began selling them as his own. However, the problem with drinkable plasmid is that they take 10 times as much Adam to produce, and in an audio log made by Frank Fontaine, he tells Suchong to stop producing them. But this audio log was made September 10th, 1958. And when you're in the Fontaine department store, you can see that the advertisements playing say that the products were created by Ryan Plasmids, which means that Ryan used the Fontaine department store for at least long enough to sell products under his Ryan Plasmids business that were also drinkable. This means that Ryan had to look at the fact that drinkable plasmids cost 10 times more than usual plasmids and said, yeah, that's fine. No! In the book, Fontaine cuts costs when plasmids are discovered by not doing research into making them non-addictive. To him, plasmids being addictive are a good thing for business, so there is zero chance he would ever consider letting Suchong even touch the idea. And Suchong isn't dumb enough to just go and make this stupid move. By figuring out how to make plasmids drinkable, he would have also figured out that they consume way too much Adam. He wouldn't have gone down that road. This whole drinkable plasmids thing is just a lazy excuse to use the vigors from BioShock Infinite, and it just makes the whole thing feel so inauthentic. But it just does not compute. It's so lazy. You have Old Man Winter versus Winter Blast, Electro Bolt versus Shock Jockey. It's all so lazy and out of place. And just for a better example too, in episode 2 of Burial at Sea, there's a poster saying Hypnotize Big Daddy is releasing in the next year.
Hypnotize Big Daddy.
Coming next year.
Of course.
While on the exact same night, Subject Delta gets hit with this exact plasmid. And before you say, well, maybe it was just a prototype version of the plasmid, if the prototype is stable enough to do the job that the full thing would do an entire year before it's released, then what is it a prototype for? I just don't think that would happen. Oh, and speaking of Big Daddies, this is a good one. Another major plot point in Burial at Sea episode 2 is the bonding of little sisters to Big Daddies, which was a bit of a mysterious event in the original BioShock. In the when Adam started to become a scarcity, it was discovered that if an Adam slug was placed inside the stomach of a young girl, it would produce a lot more of it than if they just harvested the slug. So doing this operation turns the girl into a sort of Adam factory that can produce and store Adam, a useful benefit when dead bodies started popping up more frequently all over Rapture. With the little sisters around, Adam could be extracted from these corpses and transported after it was drunk. The problem with the system was that the splices in Rapture, which were becoming more and more frequent, would do pretty much anything to get their hands on Adam. So it became clear pretty quickly that these girls needed to be protected, and a Big Daddy type was created called the Alpha Series, which would do nothing but escort these girls around. In previous years, Big Daddies were used as maintenance workers and were more often than not people who had made the mistake of pissing Andrew Ryan off. So for the Alpha series, it was specifically designed for protecting little sisters, and a pair bond would be established between the two of them with the usage of pheromones. One problem that came with the Alpha series, however, was that they could only be bonded to a single little sister for life. So if they were separated from their little sister or she died, the Alpha series would go catatonic or completely insane, which would make them useless. The desired goal for the Big Daddies would be that they could bond with any little sister they come across, and by 1959 the Alpha series were deemed failures, and it was decided that the maintenance Big Daddies would be repurposed to be the new protectors. But the issue still remained on how the pair bond would be formed, and that's what Suchong was kind of freaking out about for this whole episode. But as we see, Suchong does not end up establishing the pair bond, and it was instead Elizabeth. And this is a very significant moment in the BioShock lore. This was the first ever pair bond, and it's why maintenance Big Daddies protect little sisters in BioShock 1. But if that's the case, what the hell was this? Why is Sally calling the Big Daddy Mr. Bubbles if they haven't bonded? Why is the Big Daddy attacking Booker and Elizabeth if he hasn't bonded to the little sister? He shouldn't care. If the Big Daddy was bonded to Sally and got back up after Booker killed him, then where the hell is this goofball in the intro to episode 2 when Atlas's guys are trying to grab Sally? Well, this is something they try to explain away at the very end of the episode, alongside why Big Daddies don't have grapple hook drills in the original game, and it's all on this chalkboard. For anyone that doesn't like reading, the reason for this is that the gases and fluids that fire the grapple hook drill make the Big Daddy unreliable and unstable.
I've had a good chuckle over that one. I'm coming after you.
So the implication here is that the Big Daddy was just hanging around, and since he's so unstable, he just decided to attack Booker and Elizabeth at the exact time that Sally called for Mr. Bubbles.
Sally, it's Booker.
What are you doing? What are you doing?
Huh? Me? Just hanging around.
I gotta go!
My God, my God.
But also, with the Big Daddy being super unstable, it turns out that he doesn't just attack anyone on sight, only Elizabeth. Now, why would a Big Daddy do this unless it's acting like the Bioshock 1 Big Daddies? Because in Bioshock 1, if you pissed off a Big Daddy, he would not forgive or forget until you were dead. Even if you managed to escape him, it was game on the next time he saw you, which is exactly what happens here. The Big Daddy recognizes Elizabeth as someone he doesn't like and will instantly try to kill, but why would he be acting this way if not for the fact that Elizabeth was with the guy trying to grab Sally? If you're going to change and ignore the lore of other games, fine. But when you start contradicting yourself and your own game events, you really need to reassess the story you're writing here. Everything in this DLC is just weird. It's like they constructed the story around a faint memory of what the Bioshock lore is. Like they had a checklist saying, what stories haven't we told yet in Rapture? Not caring if the story had been told or explained in another game or book or piece of media not written by Ken Levine. I just don't get it. The content of this book was approved by Ken Levine. It says so on the Wikipedia, so why is he ignoring it? Ken Levine started Bioshock, and when he didn't do the second game, it grew on without him. It answered questions maybe he wanted to answer, but it's my opinion that just because you start something doesn't mean you should have total control over it, especially if you didn't have that much of a hand writing a majority of the content that's out for this universe today. It just feels audacious of the DLC to come in with these huge statements like, here's how the Big Daddies bonded, here's how the Rapture Civil War started, here's how Atlas knew Would You Kindly. It does all that, and then all the while it puts little to no effort into obeying the rules of the world it exists in. It's lazy, self-indulgent, self-important, and disrespectful to the characters of both the OG Bioshock games and even Bioshock Infinite. But all of this could be solved if you just went ahead and said, Burial at Sea takes place in an alternate universe. In fact, that would make everything fit a lot better, but it's not. Ken Levine stated that this is in fact the same universe that the original game takes place in. I just don't think you can come back into a franchise and insert your new thing into an old thing while completely contradicting other stuff in the franchise, including occasionally your own stuff. With Burial at Sea in the timeline, there are so many grey points that show up in the order of events, as opposed to getting rid of Burial at Sea, where we pretty much have a solid bloody date for everything in the timeline. This kind of DLC is the reason why companies hire lore keepers these days. You know, like people who know all the facts of their game universes so that the continuity actually stays intact, rather than it just being whatever the fuck the writer feels like making it. I remember back when this DLC came out, and there were some people putting out theories that Ken Levine was actually pissed off that they kept making Bioshock stuff without him, and was using this DLC to make it so there was no space for anything in the timeline except his DLC and his game. And I have to say, probably not. I honestly think that around the time Infinite released, Ken Levine was really in love with Elizabeth as a character and saw a great satisfying conclusion to her story that could also work as a nice prequel to his original game. I think he probably thought it would be cool if everything in Bioshock 1 happened because of Elizabeth, but in the process of writing the story, he just happened to butcher every character he ever made and fucked up his own timeline, even in relation to the one other game he did make in this universe. So in conclusion, conclusion, I think that Burial at Sea is very pretty, but it's not competently written. I think the concept started at, we should go see Rapture in its prime in this DLC. And then the next question was, how do we do it? And honestly, they pulled off a civilized Rapture. It's beautiful, and it's everything I imagined when I played the first BioShock, but the care and attention to detail just seems to stop as soon as you look away from the window. Like in the same DLC where you have whales and turtles swimming around outside the window to the backdrop of this huge underwater metropolis, you also have what is clearly a bottle of salts from BioShock Infinite just reskinned with the word Eve pasted over it, because it would be so hard to just make it a syringe. If you ask me, I like to pretend that this DLC doesn't exist. For this video, I've played all the games, read all the books, consumed every bit of BioShock media I could, just to get a real feel for this world, and I just have to say, I don't think this story needed to be told. You know, I think that it was filling a blank space that was not really needing to be filled. Really, I think it leaves a sour taste in my mouth for the whole story of BioShock Infinite, because that story really is beautiful and well-rounded, and when you understand it, it's just fantastic from start to end. And I don't think that this story needed to exist to tell Elizabeth's continued story. I think that BioShock Infinite kind of overstepped its boundaries with this DLC. It went and put its lore and its quantum physics and all that in a place that didn't need it. And it was all in service to tell two stories, to set up for BioShock 1 and to finish BioShock Infinite, when I think that BioShock Infinite is better when it just ends right here.
Anna?
Anna? Is that you?
Hey guys, if you're seeing this, thank you so much for watching the video. I've put a lot of effort into this. Really, this BioShock video is what made me want to make a YouTube channel in the first place. It was going to originally be a series overview of the whole BioShock story, and then I got to Burial at Sea and I realized this doesn't conclude things well, and I just couldn't stop thinking about that. So this video has been a long time in the making, and it has been a tremendous effort to get this one out, because it's been a lot of editing and honestly a lot of thinking about quantum mechanics and all that. Thinking about how these systems work in quantum physics, and then how the writer thinks they work or how they wanted it to work, and then trying to just equate all the broken logic together. It has been, I am actually mentally tired of thinking about quantum shit. I'm sick of it. But I'm really glad I could get this video out, and I'm happy you watched it. Right now, we're sitting, at time of recording, we're sitting at 275 subscribers with 10k views on the System Shock video, and I'm really happy about that. So thanks for that, and I hope that this video has been the same quality that you were looking at in the previous video. So thank you for watching, expect more content soon, and I'll see you later.